Welcome back to our channel. You're about to experience one of the most harrowing stories of survival that actually happened. For the best experience, put on your headphones, close your eyes, and sit back comfortably so you can fully immerse yourself into the story. Also, help us make the like button so popular it starts its own fan club, and hit subscribe and ring that bell to make sure you're always in the loop. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy. It was December 24th, 1971, and 17-year-old Juliane Koepcke was eagerly anticipating her Christmas holiday. She and her mother, Maria, had boarded Lanza Flight 508 in Lima, Peru, excited to visit family in Pucallpa. Pucallpa is a city located in eastern Peru, in the Ucayali region. It is situated on the banks of the Ucayali River, which is a major tributary of the Amazon River. Pucallpa is approximately 840 kilometers or 520 miles northeast of Lima, the capital of Peru. It is one of the principal ports of the Amazon basin and serves as an important hub for transportation and commerce in the region. The plane, a small DC-3, was filled with the hum of passengers chatting, the soft drone of the engines, and the occasional clink of a soda can. Little did they know that this holiday flight would turn into one of the most incredible survival stories ever told. As the plane left the runway and ascended, dark clouds began to gather ominously. The turbulence grew, and soon the aircraft was being tossed violently in a storm. Juliane's heart pounded in her chest as the plane shook like a leaf in a hurricane. When she looked over to her mother, she could see her own fear mirrored in her mother's eyes. That made her fear intensify even more. Without warning, a deafening crack shattered the cacophony of the storm. The plane was struck by lightning. The fuselage splintered, and the plane began to plummet through the air. Juliane was thrown from her seat, the world spinning in a chaotic blur. She could barely grasp what was happening as the cabin filled with a blinding light and an ear-splitting roar. When the chaos subsided, Juliane found herself lying in a dense, tangled forest. Her body ached, her clothes were tattered, and she was alone. The wreckage of the plane was scattered around her, twisted and torn. She noticed the bodies of her fellow passengers strewn about, lifeless. Her mother was missing. Almost as quickly as she started to take in her surroundings, she slipped into unconsciousness. Sometime the next morning, Juliane awoke to the sounds of the jungle, an overwhelming symphony of chirping insects, chattering monkeys, and distant bird calls. The air was thick with humidity, and the smell of damp earth and decaying vegetation filled her nostrils. Her head throbbed, and she realized she had a rather large contusion from when she must have smacked it against something during the crash. The pain in her shoulder suggested a possible fracture. Despite her injuries, she knew she had to move. She started stumbling around, frantically searching for her mother amongst all the chaos, but to no avail. She was desperate, disoriented, and terrified. The first day was a blur of pain and confusion. Juliane stumbled through the wreckage. The sight of her fellow passengers motionless and lifeless brought a wave of despair. She was struck by the brutal contrast between the serene beauty of the jungle and the violent chaos that had brought her there. Every step was a struggle as she tried to make sense of her surroundings. She found a small bag of sweets and a single sandal, the only salvageable items from the crash. The sweets provided a brief respite from her gnawing hunger, but she knew they wouldn't last long. The sandal was a meager protection against the rough forest floor, but it was better than nothing. She forced herself to focus on survival, pushing aside the fear and grief that threatened to overwhelm her. As night fell, the jungle transformed. The sounds grew louder, more menacing. The howls of distant animals sent chills down Juliane's spine. The darkness was absolute, and she felt a profound sense of isolation. She found a small clearing and lay down on the cold, damp ground, her mind racing with fear and uncertainty. Sleep was elusive as the jungle came alive around her. She was acutely aware of every rustle and snap, each one a potential threat. Her thoughts drifted to her mother. She wondered if she was alive somewhere in the jungle, or if she was among the lifeless bodies she had seen. The uncertainty was a heavy burden, but Juliane knew she had to stay strong. She focused on the immediate task of surviving the night, knowing that each moment of rest would be crucial for the unknown challenges ahead. The air was filled with the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves, which served as a constant reminder of the harsh reality she found herself in. Juliane tried to find comfort in the rhythmic sounds of the jungle, using them as a lullaby to soothe her frayed nerves. Somehow she knew she had to conserve her energy and maintain her focus if she hoped to survive. The first night was a test of her resolve, and she faced it with a mix of fear and determination. On day 2, Juliane awoke to the relentless heat and humidity. Her throat was parched, and hunger gnawed at her stomach. The sweet taste of the candy she had found the previous day lingered, but she was old enough to understand that they wouldn't sustain her for long. She decided to follow the wreckage trail, hoping it might lead her to other survivors or rescuers. The dense undergrowth clawed at her, and every step was a battle against the jungle's relentless grip. The second day was marked by a growing awareness of the jungle's dangers. Juliane encountered a wide array of wildlife, from colorful birds to curious monkeys. The jungle was alive with movement. Birds were calling and leaves were rustling all around her, creating a symphony of sounds that was both beautiful and terrifying to her. As she pushed forward, she encountered her first major obstacle, a fast-flowing river. The water was murky, and she couldn't see the bottom. The smell of wet earth and decaying leaves was overpowering. Crossing the river was treacherous. She slipped and fell multiple times, her body battered by the current. On the other side, she collapsed in a mixture of exhaustion and relief that she was not swept away. The jungle was unforgiving, and she realized she needed to conserve her energy. She found a small clearing and rested, her body aching from the day's exertion coupled with numerous cuts and bruises she had sustained during the blur that was the plane crash. As night fell, the darkness brought a new set of challenges. The sounds of the jungle seemed amplified compared to the previous night, each rustle and snap filling her mind with fear. Again, Juliane tried to find comfort in the rhythmic sounds of the jungle and tried to imagine them singing a song to calm her nerves. As the sun rose on the morning of the third day of her terrifying ordeal, Juliane realized that her injuries were undoubtedly worsening. Her shoulder throbbed more than ever, and her wounds were starting to fester. She needed water, but the jungle's streams were often tainted. She found a small pool of rainwater collected in a plant's leaves and drank deeply, savoring the momentary relief. The water was a lifeline, providing much-needed hydration in the oppressive heat. This day would be marked by a growing sense of isolation for Juliane. As her injuries were becoming more severe, she struggled to find sustenance. The jungle's dense foliage made it difficult to navigate, and she often felt totally disoriented. The constant buzz of insects and the calls of animals constantly reminded her of the jungle's dangers. She saw more than one, what she was convinced were venomous snakes, slithering through the undergrowth, and started to fear the ones she didn't see, or won't see with every new step. Her journey was slow and painful. She stumbled often, her injuries and exhaustion taking their toll. The jungle's beauty was juxtaposed with its dangers. Vibrant flowers bloomed alongside poisonous plants. She saw monkeys swinging through the trees, their curious eyes watching her constantly. The smell of fresh vegetation was mingled with the stench of decay, and at times these sensory assaults brought on a feeling of choking depression. As night fell, the darkness was once again absolute. Juliane tried to sleep, but the fear and loneliness kept her awake. Her thoughts drifted to her mother, and she wondered if she would ever see her again. The uncertainty was a heavy burden, but Juliane knew she had to stay strong. She focused on the immediate task of surviving the night, knowing that each moment of rest would be crucial to her being able to survive until rescuers had time to reach her. On the fourth day, Juliane's spirits were lifted ever so slightly when she discovered a small, clear stream. The sight of the running water was alarmingly exciting to her. She drank greedily, the cool water soothing and comforting. She decided to follow the stream, hoping it would lead her to civilization. The stream provided a sense of direction and hope, a lifeline in the unforgiving jungle. The jungle's beauty was mesmerizing. The canopy overhead was a kaleidoscope of green, with shafts of sunlight piercing through the leaves. The air was filled with the sweet scent of blooming flowers, and the sound of birdsong provided a momentary escape from her ordeal. She saw colorful butterflies flitting through the air, and small mammals darting through the undergrowth. But the jungle's dangers were ever present. She encountered a swarm of army ants, and had to quickly move away to avoid being bitten. The constant hum of mosquitoes was a reminder of the jungle's relentless assault on her body. The bites itched and burned, adding to her discomfort. She swatted at the insects, trying to keep them at bay, but ultimately she was fighting a losing battle on this front. The more she swatted, the more they seemed to become. Her journey was slow and painful. She stumbled often, her injuries and exhaustion taking their toll. As night fell, she again looked for and found a small clearing where she felt less scared to lay down to rest. The sound of the flowing water in the stream she was following was a welcome comfort when compared to the previous 3 nights, and she felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in days. The stream's gentle babbling provided a soothing background noise, helping to calm her frayed nerves. Although night 4 provided more rest than the previous nights did, Juliane's injuries were becoming more severe. Her wounds were infected, and she developed a fever. The jungle's relentless heat and humidity made her condition worse. She knew she needed medical help, but there was no sign of civilization. The 5th day was a blur of pain and exhaustion. Every step was a struggle, and she had to push through the discomfort to keep moving. Her journey continued along the stream. She saw more wildlife, colorful butterflies flitting through the air, and small mammals continued to dart through the undergrowth every once in a while. The jungle was teeming with life all around her, but she barely noticed any of it. The sounds emanating from every direction were both beautiful and terrifying to her young mind. While stumbling forward, Juliane had a brief moment of clarity of mind when she encountered a venomous spider. She managed to brush up against it and had to quickly move away to avoid being bitten. She would only realize just how lucky she was much later when she was told that this specific species of spider was the Brazilian wandering spider, also referred to as the banana spider or the armed spider, and is one of the most feared all over the Amazon rainforest. Their bite is extremely dangerous, and a bite that administers lethal amounts of venom will initially result in redness, swelling around the bite area, and severe pain. However, quite quickly afterwards, the bitten victim will begin to lose muscle control, develop headaches, and be short of breath. This may eventually lead to total paralysis and asphyxiation as the respiratory system fails, then death. As night fell, the darkness again brought its unique set of challenges. The sounds of the jungle again fueled Juliane's level of anxiety with each rustle and snap, sending pins and needles of fear all over her skin. She once again tried to find comfort in the rhythmic sounds of the jungle, but this night her efforts were pretty much futile. The 5th night really managed to test her resolve, and she pretty much had 0 sleep, despite her extreme level of exhaustion. Juliane's journey took a turn on the 7th day when she discovered a piece of wreckage from the plain. The sight of the twisted metal was both a source of despair and hope. She knew she was still far from rescue, but the wreckage meant she was on the right path, back towards the direction where the plane came from. The discovery gave her a renewed sense of purpose, a glimmer of hope in the midst of her ordeal. Her physical condition was deteriorating. Her wounds were infected and she was weak from lack of food. She found some edible berries and nuts, but they provided little sustenance. The jungle's constant assault on her senses, its sights, sounds, and smells, was overwhelming. As night fell, she found a tree with low-hanging branches and climbed up, hoping to escape the jungle's ground-level threats. The tree's bark was rough against her tender and battered skin, and the smell of sap was strong. She tied herself to the branches with her remaining clothing, desperate for some semblance of safety, and maybe even a bit of deep sleep. Although deep sleep still eluded her, she did manage to find enough perceived safety in the tree to doze off for short periods of time throughout the night. On the 8th day, Juliane's luck began to change. The stream she had been following grew wider, and she noticed signs of human activity. At one point, she stumbled upon a piece of plastic, and on a handful of occasions, a footprint in the mud. Each time, her heart raced with hope. She knew she was getting closer to civilization, and these discoveries gave her a renewed sense of purpose, along with a glimmer of hope in the midst of her ordeal. The jungle's beauty was still mesmerizing. She saw colorful birds darting through the trees, and vibrant flowers blooming along the stream. The air was filled with the sweet scent of flowers, and the sound of the flowing water was a constant comfort. The stream was a lifeline, providing much-needed hydration and a sense of direction. She spent most of the day scanning the depths of the jungle for any sign of rescue, ever hopeful that she would be saved from this hellish experience before the sun set below the horizon. As night fell, Juliane had to accept that, despite high hopes, she was going to have to face another night among the creepy crawlies and carnivorous creatures that made this jungle so brutal and dangerous. Again, she opted for a tree like she did the previous night and struggled to find the least uncomfortable position she could to settle in for the night. At least she still had the comforting sound of her companion, the stream she had been following, to provide her with some level of calm. Day 9 provided some reprieve from the monotonous struggle she had been facing for the past 8 days. Juliane encountered a group of wild pigs. The sight of the animals was both frightening and fascinating. The pigs were foraging near the stream she had been following, their snouts rooting through the mud. She kept her distance, knowing that they could be dangerous if provoked. The encounter was a reminder of the jungle's unpredictability. Her physical condition continued to deteriorate. Her wounds kept becoming more infected, and the lack of food really started to take a toll on her, both physically and mentally. The occasional berries and nuts were just not providing any meaningful sustenance. Despite her best efforts to try and banish the thought from her mind, Juliane couldn't help thinking that she might not get out of this alive. The thought of her lying on the jungle floor, still alive but unable to move any further, while insects and animals started to feast on her, terrified her so much that she let out a shriek every time this image entered her mind, forcing a different thought to take its place. On the 10th day, Juliane's luck began to change. She discovered a small abandoned hut near the stream. Despite its obvious state of disrepair, the sight of the structure still filled her system with a rush of adrenaline. The hut was musty, but the imaginary smell of food and the sight of discarded human belongings gave her hope. She rested there for the night, and managed to get some proper sleep for the first time thanks to the sounds of the jungle being muted by the walls of the hut. Juliane woke up in that same hut on the morning of the 11th day, feeling a mix of hope and fear. The previous day's discovery of the hut had provided her with a desperately needed sense of safety. As the first light of dawn filtered through the gaps in the wooden walls, Juliane could hear the distant sound of voices. She sat up, her heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. Could this be the help I had been desperately seeking, or a territorial local tribe that would not approve of my invading their land and possibly kill me? The paradox dawned on her that she had been searching for people all this time, not even giving thought to the possibility that they may not be friendly. As the voices grew louder, Juliane realized that they were speaking Spanish. Summoning what little strength she had left, she called out weakly, "Ayuda! Por favor, ayuda! Help! Please, help!" The voices stopped abruptly, and then she heard footsteps approaching. The door of the hut creaked open, and a group of local woodcutters peered inside, their faces a mix of shock and concern. The woodcutters were initially startled to find Juliane, an emaciated and disheveled young woman, inside the hut. Her appearance was alarming. She was covered in dirt and insect bites, her clothes torn and tattered. Her wounds were visibly infected, and her eyes were sunken with exhaustion. "¿Qué te ha pasado? What happened to you?" Juliane, her voice barely above a whisper, explained that she had survived a plane crash and had been wandering through the jungle for days. The woodcutters exchanged looks of astonishment and pity. Realizing the gravity of her situation, they quickly sprang into action. They helped Juliane out of the hut and offered her water and some food, which she accepted gratefully. They fashioned a makeshift stretcher from branches and vines, understanding that she was too weak to walk on her own. With great care, they carried her through the dense jungle. The journey to the nearest village was arduous, taking several hours as they navigated the thick undergrowth and crossed streams. Upon reaching the village, the woodcutters informed the local authorities about Juliane's situation. Arrangements were made to transport her to Koepcke, the nearest city with medical facilities. Juliane was flown out of the jungle on a small plane, her ordeal finally coming to an end. In Koepcke, Juliane was admitted to a hospital where doctors immediately began treating her injuries. She had sustained a broken collarbone, deep cuts, and severe insect bites on her entire body. Her wounds were cleaned and treated to prevent further infection, and she was given antibiotics to combat the infections that had already set in. She was also severely dehydrated and malnourished. requiring intravenous fluids and nutrition to stabilize her condition. Juliane spent several weeks in the hospital recovering from her physical injuries. The medical staff were amazed by her resilience and will to survive. She underwent numerous treatments and checkups to ensure she was healing properly. The psychological trauma of her experience, however, took much longer to heal. The effects of Juliane's ordeal stayed with her long after she left the hospital. Physically, she made a full recovery, but the emotional and psychological scars ran deep. She experienced nightmares and flashbacks, reliving the horrors of the plane crash and her harrowing journey through the jungle. Juliane's mother, Maria, was not found until later. Tragically, Maria had not survived the crash. Her body was discovered days after Juliane's rescue, providing some closure, but also deepening the pain of her loss. Juliane's experience had a profound impact on her life. She returned to Germany, where she continued her education, eventually earning a PhD in biology. Her survival story became widely known, and she wrote a memoir titled "When I Fell from the Sky," sharing her incredible tale of endurance and resilience. She also became an advocate for improved safety measures in aviation. Despite the trauma, Juliane found a way to channel her experience into something positive. She dedicated her life to studying the Amazon rainforest, the very place that had tested her limits and ultimately spared her life. Her story remains an extraordinary testament to the human spirit's capacity to overcome unimaginable adversity. And that brings us to the end of this episode. Thank you again for joining us. A reminder that if you like real-life stories told in story format, please be kind by subscribing to our channel. Your support is priceless and will enable us to continue to upload new content every Friday and Sunday for your enjoyment. All the best, and see you soon.